A man who could push a sword through his own body and walk away without a scar. A woman with 4 legs. A boy who could roll a cigarette using only his lips. These were not magic tricks. And these were not costumes. These were real people, with real bodies, doing things that doctors of their time could not explain. For over 100 years, they stood on stage in front of thousands of strangers, some by choice, and some who had no choice at all. Some became rich and famous because of what made them different. Others were used, controlled, and cheated out of the money their own bodies earned. Today, we are going to meet them, not as circus acts, but as people. We will look past the old posters and the strange nicknames and tell the true stories behind them as accurately as we can. Let us begin. Number 20. Mirandejo, the Invulnerable Man.
You are going to see a man have a 28-inch sword thrust through his body without hurting him.
Mirandejo, born in the Netherlands in 1912, became famous for shocking the medical world by pushing all kinds of objects through his body without getting hurt. In the 1940s, he gained fame across the world for what looked like a supernatural gift, the ability to have swords and long needles driven through his body without a single wound, without bleeding, and without pain. Doctors did not believe him at first, but his skill left them stunned. He was placed under X-rays and other medical tests while objects passed through his body, and the results proved there was no trick and no illusion behind what he did. Mirandejo is remembered today as a strange and mysterious figure, a man who pushed past the limits of what was thought possible, leaving behind a legacy of wonder that people still talk about. Number 19. Chang and Ng Bunker, the original conjoined twins. Chang and Ng Bunker were the first known and most famous conjoined twins in history. They were born on May 11, 1811 in Samut Songkhram in what was then called Siam, now known as Thailand. The brothers were joined at the chest with their livers fused together. In 1829, they moved to the United States, where they became famous performing in circuses and fairs. Their shows featured different acts built around their unique condition, and audiences were amazed. They often showed the crowd exactly how they were joined at the chest, which alone was enough to draw huge attention. To prove they could live a normal life, they walked, ran, and did simple chores together on stage, showing just how well they had learned to move as one. Chang and Ng were never separated for their entire lives, but that did not stop them from falling in love, getting married, and starting their own families. Together, they set a world record still remembered today: 21 children born between them, the most of any conjoined twins in history. Chang and Ng became household names across America and built a fortune as they traveled from city to city. Number 18. Ella Harper, the Camel Girl. Ella Harper, known to the world as the Camel Girl, was born in 1870 with a rare condition in her legs called genu recurvatum, which caused her knees to bend backward instead of forward. Because of this, she found it easier and more natural to move around on all fours. Ella began performing in circuses and sideshows at the age of 12, and by 1886, she had become the star attraction of Showman WOH, Harris's nickel-plate circus. Crowds gathered from far and wide just to see the girl with camel knees move in a way no one had ever seen before. She was featured on posters and advertisements, often described as a marvel of nature. But despite her fame, Ella chose to leave the circus in 1886 to pursue an education and a quieter life. Not much is known about her years after the circus, but records show she later married a school teacher and lived out the rest of her life away from the stage. Number 17. Annie Jones, the Bearded Lady. Annie Jones was born in 1865 in Virginia, and from birth, she showed signs of a rare condition that caused unusual hair growth. She was still a baby, only a few months old, when the famous showman P.T. Barnum discovered her and brought her into his American Museum in New York. By the time she was 5 years old, Annie already had a full beard, and she quickly became one of the museum's biggest attractions. Audiences were charmed not just by her appearance, but by her confidence and charisma on stage. She would go on to be known across the country simply as the Bearded Lady. Number 16. Martin Lorello, the Owl Man. Martin Lorello, born Martin Emmerling in Germany around 1885, became famous under a stage name that fit his one incredible skill, the Owl Man. Lorello could turn his head almost completely around, all the way to face directly behind him without moving the rest of his body. Unlike some performers in this list, his gift did not come naturally. He spent 3 years training his neck and spine to reach that level of movement. No one has ever fully explained how he managed it, though some believe it involved a slight, controlled dislocation in his neck bones. What is certain is that audiences could not look away. Lorello performed with major circuses, including Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, traveling across the United States and becoming one of the most talked-about acts of his time. Number 15. Alice Doherty, the Minnesota Woolly Girl. Alice Elizabeth Doherty was born on March 14, 1887 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She came into the world with an extremely rare condition called hypertrichosis lanuginosa, which covered her entire body in a soft layer of fine hair. None of her brothers or sisters shared this trait, and doctors could not explain why she was born this way. By the time she was 2 years old, her parents had begun putting her on display, and she started touring through the Midwest as a curiosity. Audiences called her the Minnesota Woolly Girl, and her unusual appearance made her one of the most talked-about young performers of her time. Number 14. Fanny Mills, the Big-Footed Woman. Fanny Mills was born in 1860 in England, and while she was still a child, her family moved to Sandusky, Ohio. From a young age, Fanny showed signs of a rare condition called Milroy's disease, which caused severe swelling in her legs and feet. Over time, her feet grew to an astonishing size, nearly 19 inches long and 7 inches wide. She became known across the country as the Big-Footed Woman, and people flocked to see her out of pure curiosity. Fanny turned her condition into a career, performing in circuses and dime museums throughout the 1880s. Her shows drew large crowds and steady income, giving her the means to support herself and her family for years. Number 13. Maurice Tillet, the French Angel. Maurice Tillet was a French professional wrestler known for his unusual appearance, caused by a condition called acromegaly, which led to unusual growth in his bones, especially in his face, hands, and feet. In 1945, he was photographed alongside the famous American supermodel Dorian Lee, and the images went on to become some of the most striking of his career. Many people today believe Maurice Tillet's face was the inspiration behind the animated character Shrek, though this has never been officially confirmed. Number 12. CeeLo, the Seal Man. CeeLo the Seal Man, whose real name was Stanley Barrett, was a sideshow performer born with a rare condition called phocomelia, which caused his hands to grow directly from his shoulders, with no arms in between. This gave him a seal-like appearance, which is where his stage name came from. Despite his condition, CeeLo lived an independent and skillful life on stage. He could shave himself, saw through wood, and sign his own autographs, all using only his hands and shoulders. He performed in sideshows for over 35 years, becoming one of the most well-loved and long-running acts at Coney Island. And audiences everywhere were amazed by how easily he handled everyday tasks that most people take for granted. Number 11. Grace McDaniels, the Mule-Faced Woman. Grace McDaniels was born in 1888 with a rare condition believed to be Sturge-Weber syndrome, which caused a severe and unusual growth on her face. In the 1930s, Grace joined Harry Lewiston's traveling circus, where her striking appearance drew large crowds and made her one of the show's standout attractions. She earned a steady income from her performances, enough to support herself and her son Elmer, who later grew up to manage her career. Despite the harsh way she was often advertised, those who knew Grace personally remembered her as gentle, kind, and deeply devoted to her family. Number 10. Pablo Noel, the Lion Tamer. Pablo Noel was a circus performer known for one of the most dangerous acts in the business, placing his own head inside the open mouth of a lion. In 1962, in Hamburg, Germany, Noel performed this act in front of live audiences, a display that demanded total trust and total control over the animal. Acts like this were common in circuses of that era, as crowds came from far and wide just to witness the tense and thrilling bond between man and wild beast. Number 9. Grady Stiles, the Lobster Boy. Grady Stiles, known as the Lobster Boy, was born in 1937 with a rare condition called ectrodactyly, which caused his hands and feet to form claw-like shapes. He was not the first in his family to have it. His father had the same condition and had already built a career performing because of it. By the age of 7, young Grady had joined the family act, and as he grew older, He became known for using his claw-like hands to perform impressive tricks in front of live audiences. But behind the fame, Grady's personal life was dark and troubled. He struggled with alcohol and was known to be abusive toward his own family. In 1978, on the eve of his daughter's wedding, Grady shot and killed her fiancé. Because no prison at the time was equipped to hold someone with his condition, he received only probation instead of jail time. The abuse in his home did not stop, and in 1992, Grady was shot and killed in his own trailer. His wife, Mary Teresa, and his stepson were later found responsible for arranging his death, having hired someone to carry it out after years of suffering under his violence. Grady Stiles' story remains one of the darkest in sideshow history, a reminder that fame on stage does not always reflect the truth of a person's life off stage. Number 8. Johnny Eck, the half-boy. Johnny Eck, born John Eckhart Jr. in 1911 in Baltimore, Maryland, came into the world with a rare condition called sacral agenesis, which left the lower half of his body underdeveloped. He had a twin brother, Robert, who was born completely healthy, and the two grew up close, later performing together on the sideshow circuit. Johnny refused to let his condition hold him back. He learned to walk on his hands before his brother could even stand, and he grew into a gifted acrobat known for his strength, his charm, and his one-armed handstand. Beyond performing, Johnny was also a skilled painter, a musician, and a filmmaker. His fame reached new heights in 1932 when he starred in the film Freaks, proving to the world that he was far more than his appearance. Johnny Eck challenged what people believed it meant to be normal, and he remains remembered today as one of the most talented and resilient figures to ever step into the spotlight. Number 7. Prince Randian, the human caterpillar. Prince Randian, whose real birth name was never recorded, was born in 1871 in British Guiana to parents who had been enslaved under British rule. He came into the world with a rare condition called tetraamelia syndrome, which meant he was born completely without arms or legs. Still, this did not stop him from becoming one of the most self-sufficient performers of his time. Using only his lips, tongue, and shoulders, Randian could roll a cigarette, strike a match, and light it, all without a single hand to help him. He could also shave himself, paint, and write, moving across the stage by wriggling his body like a serpent, which earned him the nickname the human caterpillar. In 1889, showman P.T. Barnum brought him to the United States, where he became a star attraction for over 4 decades. Randian was also remarkably intelligent, fluent in Hindi, English, French, and German. He married, raised a family, and remained a beloved performer until his death in 1934. Prince Randian's story stands as one of the clearest examples in sideshow history of a man who turned extreme limitation into extraordinary skill. Number 6. Felix Wehrle, the Elastic Man. Felix Wehrle was born in 1858 in Mount Ida, Wisconsin, and from a young age he discovered he had an unusual gift. He could stretch the skin on his body like taffy, pulling it out in large bunches, and he could bend his fingers all the way backward without pain or injury. It looked almost impossible to watch, as if the normal rules of the human body simply did not apply to him. Felix took his unusual talent on the road, performing in dime museums and joining famous circuses, including the Ringling Brothers. Experts today believe Felix likely had a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which weakens the body's connective tissue and can cause the skin to stretch far beyond what is normal, along with unusually loose joints. Felix Wehrle remains remembered as one of the most fascinating figures of the sideshow era, a man who showed the world just how far the human body could bend. Number 5. Frank Lentini, the Three-Legged Man. Francesco Frank Lentini was born in 1889 in Rosolini, Sicily. He came into the world with a rare condition caused by a parasitic twin, an extra leg growing from the right side of his body that never fully developed into a separate person. Frank refused to let this define him as broken. At the age of 8, his family moved to the United States, and it was not long before Lentini became one of the biggest stars in the circus world. He performed with legendary shows, including the Ringling Brothers Circus and Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, earning the nickname the Great Lentini and the respect of nearly everyone who worked alongside him. On stage, Frank used his extra leg to jump rope, kick soccer balls, and even ride a bicycle, turning what could have been a source of shame into a display of skill and confidence. He also spoke openly with audiences about his life and his condition, helping people understand rather than simply stare. Frank Lentini's career lasted over 40 years, and he is remembered today not just for his unusual body, but for the joy and pride with which he lived his life. Number 4. Lionel, the lion-faced man. Stefan Bobrowski, later known to the world as Lionel the Lion-Faced Man, was born in 1890 in Poland, covered from birth in fine hair caused by a rare condition called hypertrichosis. His mother, unable to accept his appearance, gave him up at just 4 years old to a German showman named Sedlmayr, who saw an opportunity in the boy's unusual look. As Lionel grew older, his hair grew too, eventually covering nearly his entire body and face, and he became one of the most talked-about performers in the sideshow world. But it was not just his appearance that drew people in. Audiences were struck by how gentle, well-spoken, and intelligent he was once he began to talk. Lionel went on to perform gymnastics and feats of strength as part of his act, joining some of the biggest names in the business, including the Barnum and Bailey Circus. He toured widely across Europe and America, spoke several languages fluently, and became known just as much for his charm and sharp mind as for his one-of-a-kind appearance. Number 3. Daisy and Violet Hilton, the conjoined twins. Daisy and Violet Hilton were born conjoined on February 5, 1908, in Brighton, England. They were joined at the hip, sharing a single blood circulation system but with fully separate organs. Their birth mother could not care for them, and custody was taken by a woman named Mary Hilton, who quickly saw a business opportunity in the twins and began putting them on display, first in England and later across the world. From childhood, Daisy and Violet were trained in singing, dancing, and playing instruments, and they grew into genuinely talented vaudeville performers. But behind the applause was years of control and mistreatment. After Mary Hilton died, ownership passed to her daughter Edith and Edith's husband Meyer Myers, who kept the sisters isolated and kept their earnings for themselves. In 1931, Daisy and Violet finally took legal action against their guardians, and they won, gaining both their freedom and control over their own money for the first time in their lives. From then on, the sisters managed their own careers, appearing in films including Freaks and Chained for Life, and continuing to perform on stages across the country as fully independent women. Number 2. Jack Earl, the Gentle Giant. Jack Earl, born Jacob Ehrlich in 1906 in Denver, Colorado, stood over 6 feet tall before he even turned 10 years old. By the time he was 13, he had already passed 7 feet, and as an adult, he reached roughly 7 feet 6 inches, though circus posters often advertised him as taller for effect. His extraordinary height came from a condition called acromegalic gigantism, caused by a tumor on his pituitary gland. Before joining the circus, Jack was actually a Hollywood actor, appearing in silent films such as Hansel and Gretel and Jack and the Beanstalk. His acting career came to an end after a serious fall from scaffolding on set left him with health complications. Not long after, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus offered him a contract. Jack had once said he would never take part in a sideshow, but with few options left, he reluctantly agreed and went on to spend the next 14 years touring with the circus as one of its most memorable performers. Number 1. Isaac Sprague, the living skeleton. Isaac Sprague was born in 1841 in East Bridgewater, Massachusetts. He grew up as a normal, healthy child, but at the age of 12, everything changed. He began losing weight rapidly, and despite eating well and having a normal appetite, his body simply kept wasting away. Doctors at the time had no answers, and Isaac would spend the rest of his life fighting a condition no one could explain. In 1865, he joined a circus sideshow and quickly became known as the living skeleton. His extremely thin frame made him one of the most talked-about attractions of his time, and he later joined PT, Barnum's famous museum, where audiences paid to see him and hear his story firsthand. By the time he reached his 40s, Isaac weighed only about 43 pounds. Even so, he found love, married, and had 3 healthy sons, a quiet joy in a life otherwise marked by hardship. Isaac Sprague passed away in 1887, still remembered today as one of the earliest and most iconic performers of his kind, a man whose body became a mystery that medicine of his time could never fully solve. And that brings us to the end of today's journey through some of history's most remarkable performers. Behind every strange nickname and every old photograph was a real person, someone who laughed, struggled, loved, and lived a full life, often against odds most of us will never have to face. Some found fame and fortune on their own terms. Others were used and never fully repaid for what they gave. Both truths deserve to be remembered. If their stories moved you, surprised you, or made you see this history a little differently, that is exactly what we set out to do. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.